Chapter 27. Thelma Bishop's fingers traced the faded ink on the yellowed pages before her, her mind racing to connect the ancient symbols with the stories Deirdre had shared. Liam's office, usually a bastion of order and calm, now thrummed with a nervous energy she could almost taste. Rory's footsteps echoed in the small space as he paced back and forth, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We need a plan," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Something Luther won't see coming. Thelma glanced up from the documents, her heart aching at the sight of her father's distress. She wished she could comfort him, but the urgency of their task kept her rooted to her seat. "We'll figure it out, Dad," she said softly. "We always do." John's gruff voice cut through the tension. "Figuring it out's all well and good, but we need to do it fast. Luther doesn't seem the type to sit on his hands once he's got what he wants." Thelma nodded, turning her attention back to the texts spread before her. The carvings on the sword, rendered in meticulous detail by some long-dead scholar, seemed to dance before her eyes. There was something familiar about them, something that tugged at the edges of her memory. "Deirdre," she called, not looking up from the page. "That story you told us, about the warrior who could command armies with a word. Can you tell it again?" Deirdre moved closer, her red hair catching the lamplight as she leaned over Thelma's shoulder. "Of course, it's one of the oldest in our family's collection." She cleared her throat, her lilting voice taking on the cadence of a practiced storyteller. In the days when giants still walked the land, there lived a warrior of unmatched skill. His name was Nuada, and in his hand he wielded a sword of such power that armies would kneel at the mere sight of it. As Deirdre spoke, Thelma's eyes darted between the text and the drawings. There, in the curve of a letter, in the sweep of a line, she could see echoes of the story coming to life. "But the sword's power came at a price," Deirdre continued, "and it could only be awakened by one who knew the sacred words, passed down through generations of guardians." Thelma's breath caught in her throat. "The sacred words," she murmured. "Of course, it's not just a sword, it's a key." Warren, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward. "A key to what exactly?" Thelma shook her head, frustration creeping into her voice. "I'm not sure yet, but look here." She pointed to a series of symbols etched along the sword's blade in the drawing. "These aren't just decorations, they're words, or parts of words at least." Rory paused in his pacing, moving to stand behind Thelma. "Can you read them?" he asked, hope colouring his voice. "Not entirely," Thelma admitted. "But I think they might correspond to parts of Deirdre's story, the actions, the phrases the hero uses. They're not just flowery language, they're instructions." A hush fell over the room as the implications of her words sank in. John was the first to break the silence, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you saying Luther can't use the sword unless he knows these magic words?" Thelma nodded slowly, her mind still racing to piece together the puzzle. "I think so, but it's more than just words. Look here." She pointed to another section of the text, where crude figures were depicted in various poses. "I think there are specific actions, gestures maybe, that need to be performed along with the words." Henry let out a low whistle. "Well, that's a spot of good news, isn't it? If Luther doesn't know the right magic song and dance, his fancy sword's no more use than a butter knife." But Thelma shook her head, her stomach knotting with worry. "It's not that simple. The sword itself is still a formidable weapon, and if Luther figures out how to activate it..." She trailed off, unwilling to voice the terrible possibilities that danced in her mind. Deirdre leaned in closer, her eyes scanning the text. "My grandmother used to say that the stories held more power than we knew. I always thought she was being metaphorical, but now..." Thelma nodded, a grim smile tugging at her lips. "Now we know she was being literal. The question is, how do we use this knowledge to our advantage?" Rory's hand came to rest on her shoulder, a gesture of support and solidarity that made Thelma's heart swell despite their dire circumstances. "We start by figuring out exactly what those words and actions are," he said firmly. "If we can do that, maybe we can find a way to neutralize the sword's power, or even use it against Luther." Thelma patted Rory's hand with her own. "It won't be easy," she warned. "These texts are fragmented, and Deirdre's stories have likely changed over the generations. We're working with incomplete information." John grunted, moving away from the window to join the huddle around the desk. Incomplete information's better than no information, and right now it's the only advantage we've got. Everyone nodded in agreement. Rory sat next to Thelma, placing his hand on hers. Thelma, darling, I don't mean to take you away from this, but we really need to call your mother and let her know you are all right, Rory suggested. Mother, Thelma gasped as she stood up. Oh, I feel terrible that we haven't done that already, she said. Turning to Liam, she asked, Can we use your phone, Liam? Absolutely, replied Liam. Thelma moved to the phone and dialed the numbers on the rotary phone, sudden excitement flowing through her body. Thelma's fingers trembled as she dialed the familiar number, the weight of the past few days settling heavily on her shoulders. The old rotary phone in Liam's office creaked and whirred, each click of the dial a reminder of the distance between her and home. She glanced at her father, Rory, who stood nearby, his face etched with a mixture of concern and relief. The line crackled to life, and Thelma's heart leapt at the sound of her mother's voice. Hello? Kara's tone was taut with worry, the single word laden with days of fear and uncertainty. Mama, Thelma breathed, her voice catching. It's me. I'm safe. A choked sob came through the receiver. Thelma! Oh, thank God! Are you all right? Where are you? Is your father there? The questions tumbled out in a rush, and Thelma couldn't help but smile despite the gravity of their situation. I'm fine, Mama. We're all fine. Papa's here with me, and Warren too. We're in Lisdoonvarna, at Mr. Mbaya Fitzpatrick's office. Let me speak to your father, Kara demanded, her relief giving way to a hint of her usual assertiveness. Thelma handed the receiver to Rory, who took it with a nod of thanks. Kara, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. We've got her. Our girl's safe. As her parents spoke, Thelma's gaze wandered around the cramped office. Warren caught her eye from across the room, offering a small, reassuring smile. She returned it, grateful for his steady presence in the midst of this chaos. After a few moments, Rory handed the phone back to Thelma. Your mother wants to speak with you again, he said softly. Thelma pressed the receiver to her ear once more. Mama? When are you coming home? Kara asked, a note of pleading in her voice that made Thelma's chest tighten. She closed her eyes, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. We can't come home just yet, Mama. What do you mean, you can't come home? Kara's voice rose sharply. Thelma Bishop, you've been kidnapped, held prisoner in some god-forsaken cave, and now you're telling me you're not coming home. Thelma sighed, searching for the right words to explain their predicament, without causing her mother more distress. It's complicated, Mama. We've uncovered something. Something big, something dangerous. We can't leave until we've sorted it out. Dangerous? Kara's voice was barely above a whisper now. Thelma, please, haven't you all been through enough? I know it sounds crazy, Thelma said, her free hand fidgeting with the cord of the phone. But we're the only ones who can stop this. If we don't, a lot of people could get hurt. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Kara spoke again, her voice was resigned, but tinged with a mother's eternal worry. You're just like your father, you know that, always running headlong into trouble for the sake of others. Thelma chuckled softly. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't meant as one, Kara retorted, but Thelma could hear the hint of a smile in her voice. Promise me you'll be careful, all of you. We will, Mama. I promise. Thelma's gaze drifted to the pile of ancient texts and family journals spread across Liam's desk. We're close to figuring this out. Once we do, we'll come home. I swear it. Kara sighed heavily. I suppose that'll have to do. You tell your father and that husband of yours to keep you safe, you hear me? And Thelma? Yes, Mama? I love you, more than you could ever know. Thelma blinked back tears, her throat tight with emotion. I love you too, Mama. We'll be home soon. I promise. As she hung up the phone, Thelma felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see Warren standing beside her, his eyes filled with understanding. How'd she take it? He asked softly. Thelma leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his presence. About as well as can be expected. She's worried, of course, but she understands, or at least she's trying to. Rory approached, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. We're doing the right thing, aren't we? He asked, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. Staying to finish this? Thelma nodded, her resolve strengthening as she looked between her father and her husband. "We have to. We're the only ones who know what's at stake, the only ones who can stop Luther and whatever he's planning with that sword." She turned back to the desk, her eyes falling on the ancient texts that held the key to their mission. "Come on," she said, straightening her shoulders. "We've got work to do." As they gathered around the desk once more, Thelma couldn't shake the image of her mother, alone and worried in their home across the sea. But she pushed the guilt aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. They would solve this mystery, stop Luther, and return home. They had to. The alternative was unthinkable. Deirdre watched as Thelma and Warren huddled over the ancient texts, their heads bent close together in concentration. The air in Liam's office hung heavy with the weight of their discoveries, each new revelation bringing them closer to understanding the true nature of the Sword of Nuada. But Deirdre knew there was more to the story, secrets passed down through generations of her family that could change everything. She caught Rory's eye across the room, a silent understanding passing between them. With a slight nod, he made his way towards her, navigating around the stacks of books and papers that littered the floor. "Rory," Deirdre said softly as he approached, "there's something I need to tell you. About the sword." Rory's brow furrowed, his eyes darting briefly to where his daughter sat, engrossed in her research. "What is it, Deirdre? Have you remembered something else?" Deirdre nodded, gesturing towards a quiet corner of the office. "Let's step away for a moment. This isn't something everyone needs to hear. Not yet, at least." As they moved away from the others, Deirdre could feel the weight of generations of storytellers on her shoulders. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, warning of the terrible price that came with great power. "Rory," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "the stories my family has passed down. They speak of more than the sword's power. They warn of its cost." Rory leaned in, his face a mask of concern. "Cost? What do you mean?" Deirdre took a deep breath, steeling herself for the revelation she was about to share. "The sword does grant power, influence over those who see it wielded, but it's not a gift freely given." "Go on," Rory urged, his voice tight with anticipation. "The effects are temporary, which in our case is a good thing." Deirdre continued, her eyes never leaving Rory's face. She needed him to understand the gravity of what she was about to say. "However, after the sword's influence fades, so too do the memories of those who are under its spell. They begin to forget the wielder, piece by piece, until..." "Until what?" Rory prompted, his voice barely audible. Deirdre swallowed hard. "Until they forget them entirely. The wielder becomes a ghost, remembered by none who were affected by the sword. It could possibly leave them isolated and alone for the rest of their days." She watched as the colour drained from Rory's face, his eyes widening with horror. "Dear Lord," he breathed. "And Luther, does he know this?" Deirdre shook her head. "I can't be certain. These stories, they've been guarded closely by my family for generations. It's possible he's only heard fragments, or perhaps nothing at all." Rory ran a hand through his hair, his gaze drifting to where Thelma sat, still engrossed in her research. "We can't use it," he said firmly. "The risk is too great, to be forgotten by everyone you've ever known." "I know," Deirdre agreed, her heart heavy. "But Rory, if Luther wields the sword without knowing the consequences..." "He could destroy countless lives, including his own," Rory finished, his voice grim. Deirdre nodded, relieved that Rory understood the gravity of the situation. "We need to find a way to stop him without using the sword ourselves. But how do we fight against such power?" Rory's jaw set in determination. "We'll find a way. We have to." He glanced back at the others, still oblivious to the terrible truth Deirdre had shared. "Should we tell them?" Deirdre hesitated, weighing the options. "Not yet," she decided. "Let them finish their research. Perhaps they'll uncover something that can help us find another way. For now, this knowledge stays between us." Rory nodded, his expression solemn. "Agreed. But Deirdre, if it comes down to it, if there's no other choice..." "Then we'll face that decision together," Deirdre said firmly. "But let's pray it doesn't come to that." As they rejoined the others, Deirdre couldn't shake the feeling that they were balancing on a knife's edge. The power to save or destroy lives lay within their grasp, but at what cost? She watched as Thelma excitedly pointed out a passage to Warren, her face alight with discovery. How could they protect these people they'd come to care for, while also safeguarding the world from the sword's terrible power? The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Deirdre's shoulders. She was no longer just a storyteller, passing on tales from one generation to the next. Now, she was a guardian of dangerous knowledge, tasked with helping to shape the course of history. As she settled back into her chair, ready to assist with the research once more, Deirdre silently prayed that they would find a solution. Like the crack of thunder, there was a loud rapping on the door to Liam's office, to which everyone jumped in surprise. Liam's hand froze midway through, turning the page of an ancient text. A sharp, insistent knock echoed through the cramped office, cutting through the murmur of voices and rustle of papers. Everyone jumped from the surprise and the room fell silent, tension crackling in the air like static electricity. "Were we expecting anyone?" John growled, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip. Liam shook his head, rising slowly from his chair. "Stay back," he muttered to the others, his eyes never leaving the door. "Could be trouble." He approached cautiously, years of investigative work lending a predatory grace to his movements. Another knock, more insistent this time, rattled the thick wood of the door. "Who's there?" Liam called out, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "Open up, Fitzpatrick. I've got a message for you and your little band of misfits." Liam's blood ran cold. He knew that voice, Angus, Luther's right-hand man. A brute with more muscle than sense, but dangerous all the same. "Liam, don't," Thelma began, but Liam waved her off. "It's all right," he said, though he didn't entirely believe it himself. If they wanted to storm the place, they'd have done it already. With a deep breath, Liam unlatched the door and swung it open. Angus loomed in the doorway, his bulk seeming to fill the entire frame. The henchman's face was set in its usual scowl, but there was something different in his eyes, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "Evening, Angus," Liam said coolly, leaning against the doorframe with forced casualness. "Bit late for a social call, isn't it?" Angus's scowl deepened. "Don't get smart with me, Fitzpatrick. I'm not here to fight." "No?" Liam raised an eyebrow. "That'd be a first." A low chuckle rumbled from behind him. John, no doubt. Liam could practically feel the tension radiating from the others, coiled and ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. Angus's meaty hands clenched into fists, but he made no move to enter the office. "I'm here to deliver a message from Mr. Deegan. He wants to meet." Liam's other eyebrow joined the first. "Meet? And why would we agree to that?" "Because you don't have a choice," Angus growled. "The field near the cliff, top of the hour. All of you. Mr. Deegan says it's time to end this little game." A chill ran down Liam's spine. The field near the cliff, where this whole mess had started, where they'd first encountered Luther and his obsession with the Sword of Nuada. "And if we refuse?" Liam asked, though he already knew the answer. Angus's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Then Mr. Deegan starts using that fancy sword of his, and believe me, you don't want that to happen." Behind him, Liam heard a sharp intake of breath. Deirdre, most likely. He resisted the urge to turn and look at her, to see if the fear in her eyes matched the knot forming in his gut. "We'll be there," Liam said finally, his voice low and tight. Angus nodded once, seemingly satisfied. "Top of the hour. Don't be late." With that, he turned and lumbered away, his heavy footsteps echoing in the narrow street. Liam closed the door, his hand lingering on the weathered wood for a moment as he collected his thoughts. When he turned to face the others, he found a sea of worried faces staring back at him. "Well," Rory said, breaking the tense silence, "I suppose that settles our plans for the evening." "We can't seriously be considering going," Warren protested, his arm protectively around Thelma's shoulders. "It's obviously a trap." John snorted. "Of course it's a trap. Question is, do we have any choice but to spring it?" Liam moved back to his desk, his mind racing. Angus wasn't lying about one thing. We can't risk Luther using that sword in populated areas. If he's willing to meet on neutral ground... "Neutral?" Henry scoffed. "That field is anything but neutral, Liam. It's where this whole mess started." "Exactly," Liam nodded. "Which means we know the terrain. We can prepare." Deirdre stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "There's something else to consider. The sword. It has limitations, weaknesses. If we can exploit those. Liam's eyes narrowed. What kind of weaknesses? But before Deirdre could answer, Thelma cut in. Wait, look at this. She pointed to a passage in one of the ancient texts. I think I've found something about the sword's activation, if we can prevent Luther from speaking the right words. As the group huddled around Thelma, poring over her discovery, Liam felt a glimmer of hope spark in his chest. They were outgunned and outnumbered, facing an enemy with a magical weapon of untold power. But they had knowledge on their side, and sometimes that was the most powerful weapon of all. All right, folks, Liam said, his voice cutting through the excited chatter. We've got less than an hour to come up with a plan. Let's make it count. As they began to strategize, Liam couldn't shake the feeling that they were hurtling towards a confrontation that would change all their lives forever. For better or worse, this night would see an end to the mystery of the Sword of Nuada, and perhaps an end to much more besides.